I just talked about a fight where there's basically two guys from the Dana White Contender Series making their UFC debuts against each other, and we've got to that fight. We've got Melsik Baghdasaryan and Collin Anglin. Now, both of these guys, Dana White Contender Series alum, and very exciting fights. We talk about the way that, Baghdasaryan just really sold everybody on that technique and striking, right? He might not be the biggest, combo throwing kind of guy, but that kickboxing background in history is obvious, right? Throws incredibly powerful body kicks. He's got a mean left hand, and it's so funny, but you look at his MMA record, and after losing his his MMA debut, the guy said, "Bun this for a bit," went off into kickboxing and boxing, honed those skills a little bit, and basically never looked back. Has not lost an MMA fight ever since, and basically went on to the Dana White Contender Series, and pulled off a pretty big upset against Dennis Bazooka, who's, Ray Longo, Matt Serra, Chris Weidman type of fighter. He was, very much the favorite in that fight. And Aljamain Sterling was even in his corner, but unfortunately, our Armenian strikers seemed to play spoiler a lot of the time, and Baghdasaryan definitely did that. And so for me, I like what I saw in that fight. I think that outside of the cardio, outside of maybe the holes in what could be a ground game, things like that, I think those might be the areas that we're going to have to see improvements, across the board. But outside of that, you talk about the power, you talk about the kicks, just such a great fighter to watch. He's just a powerful kickboxer. I think he reminds a lot of people of just like a stocky or more powerful version of Zabit. And I think there's a lot of comparison there. But now let's talk about Anglin a little bit. The Anglin Dana White Contender Series fight was more impressive for me because of the adversity. I felt like in the Baghdasaryan fight, you just saw a guy who was extremely more powerful, was able to kind of win so much in the first half of the fight that he was able to do enough to keep that fight in his back pocket for the remainder of 3 rounds. In the Collin Anglin fight, the guy he was able to get the back in the first, but then he took massive shots from Muhammad Naimov. Now he goes into the second round and is like, well, I almost got ended I almost got ended in the end of the first round there. Let me see what I can do for the rest of the fight. All of a sudden we start to see him employ a bit more of a wrestling game, right? I think that's what I enjoyed a lot when it came to Collin Anglin showing up the Dana White Contender Series, because if there was like one of those momentum meters that you see in video games or sometimes on betting sites or whatever, it really was fluctuating the first and then just skyrocketed after he kind of did his damage on the feet and was able to work in some wrestling. That's the part that I really enjoyed about his game, because I think that's where he also has almost like a lucky draw here, because he goes into one kickboxing fight. Well, he goes into a fight against one kickboxer and now basically has to do the same thing. So from a game plan perspective and keys to victory, it's almost fairly similar, right? But in this case, avoid the power at all costs early, because that head movement, the footwork, all of that stuff that he was showing off against with Naimov, especially early in the fight, are all going to be important over the course of 3 rounds against a guy like Baghdasaryan. And so that's where I'm seeing that if Collin wants to win this fight, man, it's very much avoiding anything powerful in the beginning. Don't get caught in brawls. This is a guy that wants to be in that position with you. Stay back, make him frustrated, land more technical stuff, especially early. Maybe if you can get some takedowns or at least some clinch work to tire him out, you could really start to take over in the second and third rounds and even look for a finish maybe. The really cool thing about the Anglin-Naimov fight is that Anglin was very comfortable striking after he kind of hurt Naimov, both, internally from a cardio perspective and externally with just damage. The strikes were beautiful. The combos were perfect. And that's kind of where I'm seeing game plan wise. It's just hard for Anglin not to do the same things in this fight against another kickboxer who might be a bit bigger and a bit more powerful and definitely a lot more explosive. And we can talk about the winning areas for Baghdasaryan. Aggression is so key for him, but manage that cardio. Understand that you're dealing with a pretty good counter striker where he's looking for you to do looping things so he can kind of do the lean backs and come back forward. I think that that's an area where if he's improving on that, not looking at, getting taken down, all of those little things that can keep the fight standing and have him manage his cardio, there's a good opportunity for him to be a huge household name at the end of, 2021. I think that he just has all of those things that people fall in love with, but he's what you call a raw talent. Like, he's just so raw right now, and I think that there's a lot of opportunity for him to improve on those skills and become a complete MMA fighter. But with that said, taking a guy like Bazooka in his Dana White Contender Series fight, Now a debut against a guy like Collin Anglin. And, even on the flip side with Anglin showing how good he was in his debut against the Naimovs of the world, I'm going to lean with Vegas thinking that Baghdasaryan deserves to be the favorite here. There's no reason to think that, Anglin should be a betting favorite. I think that from a MMA analysis perspective, there's a very good conversation there for him to be the better fighter in rounds 2 and 3. But overall, I'm going to give the edge to Baghdasaryan. I'm going to give him a line of about minus 170 to minus 180, just because I think he's a pretty big fan favorite right now, and guaranteeing that he's generating a lot of pizzazz, if you will. So let's take a look at the lines. I think it's going to be a great fight. I'm pretty excited for that one. And wow. So, it's an interesting movement, right? You see Baghdasaryan coming in as a plus 120 dog as an opener, with Anglin opening as a minus 140 favorite. That line got bet so far down that Baghdasaryan is now coming in as a minus 150, with Collin Anglin looking at a plus 110, plus 125 in those ranges there. So, a lot of line movement here. I'm going to actually say that is technically the biggest line movement, only because I'm going to say that the dog and the favorite switched, but Chris Grutzwacher moving from a plus 150 to about a plus 240, plus 220 average is pretty massive too. So outside of that, I really think that that's going to be one of the most fun fights on the card overall. I just think that game plan wise, there's a lot to be said for both guys. And I really do believe with Anglin opening as a minus 140, now sitting around that plus 120, plus 125 range, watch the tape. Let me give you some advice. I think this is the kind of guy that might be smart enough to avoid those strikes early and can probably pull off an upset. So if I had to lean right now, I'm actually going to tell you that I'm leaning Collin Anglin, but I do think that the weigh-ins and how these guys look, come fight night is going to be important, especially for Baghdasaryan, who's always a bit thicker, but an improved, overall MMA game for him is going to make him such a deadly fighter. So I can't wait for that.